Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Geraghty.
And welcome, everyone, to the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives. Jim, all three of them deal with Republicans, so it's not all good news like it was yesterday. But let's start with the good martini. This was earlier Friday morning on the floor of the U.S. Senate. The presiding officer was Senator Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia. The vote was on ending debate, invoking cloture on the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh and advancing to a final floor vote on his nomination to be on the Supreme Court.
On this vote, the yeas are 51, the noes are 49. The motion is agreed to.
So that sets in motion about a 30-hour process to get to a final vote late Saturday afternoon. In that 51-49, there was one Democrat who voted with the Republicans. That was Joe Manchin of West Virginia. There was also Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, the Republican, voting with the Democrats. A little bit more on her a little bit later. So, Jim, obviously it's good news that this vote passed. We couldn't get to the final vote without it. Susan Collins will announce later Friday afternoon, and by the time some folks hear this, she'll have made her decision on how she's going to vote. So we don't know exactly whether voting for cloture means voting for the nomination, but the fact that we at least got to the final nomination and we're getting close to the end here is a good thing.
It is. And I think Republicans breathe a little bit easier. I think that everyone kind of figured it would be something in this 51-49 narrow margin, mostly party line vote. But when Lisa Murkowski voted no, you could hear gasps all around, both Capitol Hill and Twitter. A couple of Republican sources saying they were totally blindsided by that. And literally, as we were about to sit down to tape this podcast, Greg, I'm seeing Lee Ann Caldwell, reporter for NBC on Capitol Hill, saying Lisa Murkowski tells Frank Thorpe that she changed her mind on her way to the chamber to vote. She was the only Republican to vote against the procedural vote. So that explains why so many people were surprised. Many, my assumption that her colleagues and lots of other Republicans believed that she was going to vote yes on the moving forward with the vote. As of, this is a little bit before noon on Friday afternoon, Greg, I don't know about you. I'm hearing very conflicting things from various Republicans on Capitol Hill. A lot of folks say, look, they wouldn't be going forward with it if they didn't have the votes. Mitch McConnell is a sharp guy. He's been laying off the cocaine for a while. His judgment is sound, and that we wouldn't be doing this if the votes weren't there. We were supposed to hear at 3:00 from Susan Collins, another critical vote. She voted in favor of cloture and proceeding with the nomination. We have Manchin. Flake voted to move forward. But I got to tell you, Greg, I don't think this is necessarily a slam dunk. I don't think this is necessarily a done deal. There were certainly some comments from Flake that sounded like yesterday like he was still wavering. And obviously voting for the cloture does not necessarily mean you're going to vote for the nomination. Collins, we know that Collins and Murkowski are close. We know they kind of share a similar worldview. It's very surprising to see the two of them voting differently on an issue as big and important as this. We'll probably know more about Collins' position after this 3:00 speech. You do the math on this, Greg. Assuming Manchin votes with the Republicans, they could afford to lose Flake and Collins and Murkowski. That would still bring it out to a 50-50 vote.
Wait, no. You can't lose all three.
No, you're right. Okay, so if they lose two of them, you would have a 50-50 tie. The thing I am hearing from some folks is that Joe Manchin is much easier for him to be the 51st vote or the 52nd vote than to be the 50th vote, and people who aren't sure if he wants to do that. So, I think we're going to have a white knuckle for a little while here, Greg. I'm not 100% sure that this is a done deal, and I think it's a little bit. The other thing which I think should make Republicans a little bit nervous. Flake wanted the extra FBI investigation, and the investigation came forward. Just according to an announcement from Grassley, they actually talked to 10 witnesses, not the 4 that were initially listed. But I guess I'm saying if you're Chuck Grassley or you're Mitch McConnell right now, or you're the White House, in your mind, you gave everything Lisa Murkowski she could possibly want and she could possibly ask for, and she still voted no. So you got to start really worrying about those other senators there. We will see how this shakes out, but none of this could happen if the cloture vote had not passed the way it had. So at least that has gone so far. I have a feeling, Greg, we have at least a few more tense hours, if not a few more tense days, before the confirmation vote is resolved.
Let's talk a little bit more about Lisa Murkowski. I mean, Lisa Murkowski has never been confused with a Tea Party sympathizer. She's always been a little bit more moderate. But even after she lost her primary and had to win back her seat with a write-in campaign in 2010, she was never really one that was regularly on the fringe and one that you had to convince not to bolt to the other side. But then I don't know if it's just whether she's got animosity towards the president, perhaps, that she hasn't spoken about publicly very much. But she really seems to be a bigger problem just in the last year or two than she has been since she first took over this seat after her dad won the Alaska governorship there in 2002. Any insight into how she suddenly became this champion of Planned Parenthood and the Democratic darling on the right side of the aisle?
You know, Greg, I think some of this probably relates to being challenged in a primary, losing the primary, coming back and managing to win as a write-in candidate. And when your last name is Murkowski, that's not easy, even if your father's been in politics for a long time and you've been in politics for a long time. Joe Miller ran as an independent against her again this last time, did not succeed against her. You could argue she, despite the fact that she isn't necessarily the biggest, most household name, that she is among the most secure people in the U.S. Senate. And, oh, by the way, she's not up. I keep seeing Republicans saying, well, we're going to get her. We're going to show her when she goes for re-election. Well, that's not going to happen until 2022, guys. I don't think this will be completely forgotten by then, but a lot of things will happen between now and 2022, including the 2020 presidential election. That could be in the middle of Trump's second term. That could be under a Democratic president. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what will happen on a whole bunch of fronts. So my sneaking suspicion is that this will be a factor the next time Lisa Murkowski faces the voters. If she chooses to, it's entirely possible she might choose to retire. But I don't think it'll be quite as decisive just because it'll be considered, 5 years ago or close to four and a half years ago when Election Day 2022 rolls around.
52 score for Lisa Murkowski from the American Conservative Union this year, 54 last year, lifetime rating of 59. So she is getting more liberal, but she's never exactly been an A student from a conservative perspective. Jim, let's move to our crazy martini now. And for the most part, we've really been watching four senators here. Manchin from the Democrats, and then, as we mentioned, Flake, Collins, and Murkowski. But there was a little bit of a wobbling earlier this week for Ben Sasse of Nebraska. Now, ultimately, he's announced here in the past day or so that he is going to support Kavanaugh, and he voted for cloture earlier today. But earlier this week, he was on the Senate floor blasting Trump for his comments at the rally regarding Ford's testimony. And certainly there can be a lot of different analysis of that. But here's what he had to say about how the people back home in Nebraska and his interpretation of what they're telling him frustrates him about Washington. Take a listen.
But you know what my constituents back in Nebraska told me this weekend they think this is now about? They think it's about us. They think it's about all of us in this town being addicted to the circus. They don't think very many of us are interested in truth. They think we're interested in political instrumentality. They think we're interested in exploiting differences and divisions in America because we're addicted to short-term power in a city that isn't worthy of much respect.
Well, that last part's true. It's a city that's not worthy of much respect. But, Jim, there's an equivocation here that's very Jeff Flake-ish as he tisks both sides, acting as if both sides have been equally political and equally craven here. It's a Supreme Court nomination. It's an important one at that. It's a swing seat that's been held by Anthony Kennedy for 30 years. And so it's going to obviously engender a lot of political debate. But to argue that both sides have acted in similar manners in this confirmation fight is ridiculous.
You know, Greg, if you'd said to me a couple of weeks ago, the fight over Kavanaugh is going to get really nasty. It's going to get really ugly, a lot of accusations thrown around. And in the final 2 weeks, South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham will turn into Honey Badger and will suddenly attack the opposition like a rabid wildebeest and just, show his fighting spirit and denounce the below the belt, out of bounds, late hit, ugly attacks. And he will stand up for what he thinks is right. And he'll go to an Atlantic event and people boo him. He'll tell them, oh, boo yourself. And he'll take the old comments from James Carville and he'll throw them in the face of these ignorant millennials who haven't even heard of these sorts. Anyway. and that Ben Sasse will go on a social media sabbatical for 2 weeks because it's good for his soul. I like Ben Sasse. I'm probably always going to like Ben Sasse. This is not, a deal breaker or a relationship breaker, but this is kind of weak tea. That this is really kind of disappointing. This was an all hands on deck moment. And I don't believe that this really was, that this fight, it started about Kavanaugh, but it really turned into a question of, do you believe people are innocent until proven guilty? And it's all wonderful to have this slogan, believe women, but you can't have the slogan. If you really live by the slogan, believe women, then you don't believe in innocent until proven guilty. You believe that the accusation itself is sufficient to determine guilt. And this is undoing the Magna Carta, right? So this should be really in Ben Sasse's wheelhouse, right? This should be the sort of thing that he's up arms about and really active about. And instead, he criticizes the president. Fine. I actually think the president, yes, he's had one or two really ugly moments in the last couple of weeks. But let's face it, Trump has one or two ugly moments, in a morning. This has been he's been fairly subdued and quiet. And this is about as reticent as President Trump gets. So he's got to put the Trump criticism in there. Fine.
Greg, I don't think this is a moment in which you say, isn't it terrible that both sides are being so partisan? I think this is very much set up by a Democratic Party that saw their efforts against Neil Gorsuch fall short and wanted to try something new and different and was willing to, throw out a last-minute accusation of a devastating, horrible crime, but with no supporting witnesses or supporting evidence, and to put Brett Kavanaugh in the awkward and uncomfortable position of attempting to prove a negative. If you want to gripe about certain things Republicans have done in this, I guess you can, but bringing in the outside prosecutor, numerous offers to Ford to testify, agreeing to the FBI investigation to extend it for a week. Republicans bent over backwards here to make sure that the accusers were treated fairly and that this was sorted out as thoroughly as possible. So it's kind of frustrating to see this, aren't both sides being bad? And just one last point about Sasse's comments on the floor. He commented that, two of his friends had been raped and that sexual assault is an exceptionally important issue. And when I see these arguments, Greg, are there people out there who are saying that sexual assault is not a serious crime? Are there people saying that it never happens? I don't think that's really what's at issue is here. Is this accusation true or not is the question here. There's been a bunch of really heartfelt, heartbreaking, just raw emotional pieces from women describing times they were attacked in the past. And God bless them for sharing that with the world. And I'm sure it's extremely difficult, and I hope the whole process is cathartic and helps them heal and helps them feel empowered and no longer live in fear, all that great kind of stuff. But none of that tells us what Brett Kavanaugh did. And I feel like throwing this all out there is kind of a distraction. We're getting away from what's supposed to be adjudicated here. Sasse kind of went down that road there. So hopefully this is a one-off, but it just kind of feels like it's very odd that, Ben Sasse, of all guys, the guy who probably could have done a great deal of good during this debate, with his great kind of, analytical mind and plain-spoken, direct forms of communication, really didn't step up in this circumstance. It's a little bit surprising and frustrating. I expect things will get better, but, kind of disappointing, all things considered.
Jim, we're getting breaking news that Jeff Flake plans to vote yes on final confirmation. Yes, I know that a week ago he said the same thing, and then we had some issues. So as long as he stays out of the elevator, I think we might be okay with him on Saturday. So then it really does come down to Susan Collins and maybe Joe Manchin with the cherry on top if his vote's not decisive.
That's the huge deal, Greg, if he holds for the next 24 hours. I'm just saying if. That's all. That's just big capital I, capital F, if.
And just one thing that we want to, at least I want to mention here. There was a news story yesterday, and it's true. Montana Senator Steve Daines has a conflict tomorrow. His daughter's getting married, I assume, back in Montana, or at least not in Washington, and so he might not be there when the vote is called. And so I think most people take a rational approach to this. Those who understand the Senate know that you can hold the vote open as long as you want if you control it, which the Republicans do, and that's exactly what they're going to do if his vote is needed. But you still had some folks out there like, let's see, Laura Ingraham. What would George Washington do? Remember when he left Mount Vernon to sleep on the cold floor of Valley Forge? And then Ann Coulter. Maybe Senator Daines can fly back to his daughter's wedding in Montana with Dr. Ford on her Gulfstream. Look, as I just said, they're going to keep the vote open for him if they need to. Secondly, I have 2 daughters. I'm never going to be in the United States Senate, but I can assure you now, if I ever am, and one of them is getting married, they're going to win.
My understanding is that Daines reached out to Kavanaugh himself and said, I'm going to be there to vote for you. Now, I don't know what that means. I'm going to vote for you and we'll keep the vote open, or I'll hop on a plane, or I'll vote and then head over. I was talking with some folks last night, Greg, and we were trying to think through the time difference that actually if you held the vote, if you did the vote as early as possible, he could get there and probably arrive around mid-afternoon or so. I don't know when the wedding is scheduled for and things like that. But I also imagined last night, Greg, a much happier, wackier, more fun version of this, where Mitch McConnell, Cocaine Mitch, has this great idea. Steve, I understand you're in a tough situation. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to organize the entire U.S. Senate for this wedding. Bring your daughter, bring your son-in-law, just bring both families. We're holding the wedding right here on Capitol Hill tomorrow. And so you can vote, just run down the hall. We'll do the whole wedding, right? This is the stuff that wacky romantic comedies are made of. So you've got 24 hours to organize a wedding on Capitol Hill. Go!
Oh, update. Jeff Flake, I'll vote yes on confirmation unless something big happens. So,
Greg, he's messing with us. Unless the coin comes up tails.
Oh, principle over politics is what Jeff Flake likes to say. But
Greg, this week has been a long month.
You couldn't even hold it together for the duration of our podcast.
For the sentence.
Hang on, everyone. Good luck on Saturday. Jim, you are off celebrating all things Christopher Columbus on Monday. Enjoy that, and we'll see you back here on Tuesday.
See you Tuesday, Greg.
Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Have a great weekend. We'll see what happens in the Senate, and tune in again on Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.